The
Here are the
moment I
papers you
walked
need to
into that
sign.
courtroom, I realized my own children
What is
had
this?
already erased me from
What are
their
you
lives.
doing?
My son Daniel wouldn't even look at me.
This paperwork
My daughter
confirms
Rebecca
everything
sat
we
beside him,
suspected.
whispering to the lawyer.
Why would
like
you
I
betray
didn't
the family
exist.
like this?
They had gathered to divide what was left of
He
our
is
family
not coming
without
back.
me.
He told me
I stood up,
himself.
my hands trembling,
You're
ready to
lying.
fight for the only
I
home
don't
I had
believe
left.
you.
That's when the judge leaned forward, stared straight at me, and everything changed. I know her, he said quietly. She once saved my career. The room went silent, and suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. If you've ever felt pushed aside by the people you loved most, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read every comment, and if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. You're not alone in this. After my husband Thomas died, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It wasn't just the silence, though that was heavy enough pressing against the walls like something alive. It was the way everything shifted. Subtly at first, quietly, like furniture being rearranged in the dark while I slept. For 40 years, I had been the center of this family. Not the loudest voice, not the one who made the money, but the one who held everything together. I remembered birthdays without reminders. I kept track of who was hurting and who needed space. I was the one who stayed up late when Daniel couldn't sleep after his first breakup. The one who sat in the front row of every school play Rebecca ever performed, in even the terrible ones. And when Thomas was alive, that mattered. After he was gone, it didn't seem to anymore. At first, Daniel started calling less. "Work's been crazy, Mom," he would say. "I'll come by next weekend." Next weekend turned into the weekend after that. Then a month passed, then 2. Rebecca was different. She still called, but there was something distant in her voice, like she was checking a box instead of talking to her mother. "You doing okay?" she'd ask. "Yes," I would answer. "Good," she'd say quickly. "I've got to run." That was it. No more long conversations, no more laughter, no more asking how I really felt. And then there was Laura. My daughter-in-law had always been polite, careful, controlled, the kind of woman who smiled without ever showing her teeth. I used to think she was just reserved. Now I wasn't so sure. The first time I noticed something was off, it was during a Sunday afternoon at Daniel's house. I had brought over a casserole, Daniel's favorite, the same one I'd made for him since he was a teenager. I remember standing in the kitchen, setting it down, expecting at least a small smile. "Oh, thank you." Instead, Laura glanced at it briefly and said, "Oh, we've been trying to eat healthier lately." It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Flat, dismissive, final. Daniel didn't say anything. He just kept scrolling on his phone. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, my hands still resting on the edge of the dish, as if I could somehow hold on to the moment and reshape it into something familiar. But it was gone. That was the beginning. After that, things changed faster. There were conversations I wasn't included in, plans I wasn't told about, decisions that used to involve me suddenly didn't. One afternoon, I overheard Daniel and Laura talking in the living room while I was in the hallway. "We need to think long-term," Laura said. "Your mom can't manage things forever." "I know," Daniel replied quietly. "I've been thinking about that." My chest tightened. "Manage what?" I stepped into the room, trying to keep my voice steady. "Manage what?" They both looked at me like I had interrupted something private. "Nothing, Mom," Daniel said quickly. "Just finances. Future stuff. I've been managing just fine," I said. Laura smiled that thin, careful smile. "Of course you have. We're just planning ahead." Planning ahead. The words stayed with me long after I left. It wasn't concern. It wasn't care. It was strategy. Rebecca changed too, but in a different way. She started correcting me. Small things at first. Mom, that's not how things work anymore. Mom, you don't really understand investments. Mom, you should let Daniel handle that. Each sentence chipped away at something inside me. Not because she was wrong, but because of the way she said it. Like I was outdated, irrelevant, a problem that needed to be managed. I began to notice how they looked at me, not with warmth, not with love, but with calculation, as if they were already imagining a future where I wasn't part of the equation. The hardest part wasn't what they said. It was what they stopped saying. No one asked for my opinion anymore. No one told me what was going on. I would sit in the same living room where we used to spend holidays together, listening to them talk about things I didn't fully understand. Stocks, properties, legal structures, while I quietly faded into the background. Like a ghost in my own family. One evening I tried to speak up. "I think your father would have wanted us to be careful," I said gently. Daniel sighed, not loudly but enough. "Mom, things are different now." Different. That word again. Rebecca didn't even look at me. "We're just trying to do what's best." What's best? For who I wanted to ask. But I didn't, because deep down I already knew the answer. It wasn't for me. The realization came slowly then, all at once. I wasn't being protected. I was being replaced. Every time I walked into a room, conversations would pause for just a second too long. Every time I asked a question, the answers felt rehearsed, carefully chosen, filtered, like they were managing information around me. And the worst part, I let it happen. Because I kept telling myself they were still my children. That this was just grief. Just a phase. Just something we would get through together. But grief doesn't make people look at you like you're an obstacle. Grief doesn't make your own son avoid your eyes. Grief doesn't make your daughter talk to you like you're less. One night, I sat alone in the house Thomas and I had built together, staring at the old photographs on the wall. There was one of Daniel at age 10, missing his front teeth, grinning like the world belonged to him. Another of Rebecca in her graduation gown, tears in her eyes as she hugged me. Back then, I was their safe place. Now I wasn't even part of their plans. And for the first time in my life, a thought crossed my mind that I couldn't ignore. What if my family wasn't just drifting away from me? What if they were quietly pushing me out? I didn't know it yet. But the answer to that question was already waiting for me. Hidden in conversations I wasn't meant to hear. Locked inside documents I wasn't supposed to see. And soon I would realize just how far they were willing to go. The dinner invitation came 2 weeks later. That alone should have meant something. Daniel rarely invited me over anymore, not without a reason. And when he called, his voice carried that same careful tone I had begun to recognize. Polite, controlled, almost rehearsed. "Mom, we're having dinner on Friday," he said. "You should come." You should come. Not "we'd love to have you." Not "we miss you." Just "you should come." Still, I said yes. Because somewhere deep inside me, there was still a part that believed things could go back to the way they were. That maybe this dinner was a step toward that. A small bridge back to being a family again. I spent longer than I should have deciding what to wear. Something simple but nice. Not too formal, not too casual. I even found myself fixing my hair twice, as if I were preparing for something important. Maybe I was. When I arrived, the house looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel the same. The lights were on, the table was set, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but there was something underneath it. Something tight, unspoken. Rebecca was already there, sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Hi, Mom." No hug, no warmth, just acknowledgement. Daniel came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Hey," he said, giving me a quick, one-armed hug that felt more like obligation than affection. Laura appeared behind him, smiling that same thin smile. "Michael, you made it." "Of course I made it. I was invited." I took my seat at the table, folding my hands in my lap, waiting for something, anything that felt normal. But nothing did. Dinner started quietly. The clinking of utensils against plates filled the silence more than conversation did. I tried to speak first. "This smells wonderful," I said. Laura nodded. "It's a new recipe." That was it. No follow-up, no effort to include me. Daniel and Rebecca started talking about work, investments, numbers I didn't fully follow. Not because I couldn't, but because they moved too fast, jumping from one topic to another without ever pausing long enough for me to enter the conversation. It felt deliberate, like they were speaking in a language just slightly out of reach. I waited for a moment, any moment, to join in. It never came, so I created one. "I was thinking about what to do with the house," I said carefully. "Your father always wanted—" Rebecca cut me off. "Mom," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "You don't really understand how these things work." The words landed harder than I expected. I blinked. "I was just saying, we've been talking about restructuring assets," she continued, glancing at Daniel. "There are better ways to manage things now." "Better ways? To manage what? To manage me?" Daniel didn't look at me. He just kept eating like this conversation was routine, like it had already been decided somewhere else. "I've handled our finances for years," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That was different," Rebecca replied. "Things are more complex now." There it was again. Different. Always different. I felt something tighten in my chest. "I may not know everything," I said slowly, "but I'm not incapable." Laura finally spoke, her voice soft, almost sympathetic, but not quite. "No one's saying that," she said. "We just think it might be easier if Daniel took the lead moving forward. Easier. For who I looked at my son. Daniel." For a moment, he hesitated. Just a moment. Then he nodded. "It's just practical, Mom," he said. "You don't need to stress about this stuff anymore." Stress. That word hit differently. Like they had already decided what I could handle and what I couldn't. Like they had quietly moved me into a category I didn't agree with. I set my fork down. "I'm not stressed," I said. Silence. No one responded. Rebecca took a sip of her wine. Laura adjusted her napkin. Daniel stared at his plate. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. And that was when I realized something that hurt more than anything they had said so far. They weren't arguing with me. They weren't trying to convince me. They were simply dismissing me, like my voice didn't matter enough to challenge. Like I had already lost a conversation I didn't even know we were having. I tried one more time. "I think your father would have wanted us to discuss this together." That got a reaction. Rebecca let out a small, almost impatient sigh. "Mom, this isn't about Dad." But it was. Everything about this family had always been about him and about us. At least it used to be. Daniel finally looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time that night. "We're just trying to do what's best," he said. The same words Rebecca had used before. Practiced. Aligned. Final. And in that moment, I understood something that I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't a conversation. It was a decision. One they had already made. Without me. I felt my throat tighten, but I refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Instead, I nodded slowly. "If that's what you think," I said quietly. No one stopped me when I pushed my chair back. No one asked me to stay. No one said I was wrong, because to them it didn't matter anymore. I grabbed my purse, my coat, and walked toward the door. "Drive safe," Daniel called after me. "Drive safe." That was all. I stepped outside into the cold night air, the door closing softly behind me, and for the first time, the truth settled in fully. This wasn't just distance. This wasn't just grief. This was something else, something intentional, something controlled. They weren't just moving forward without me. They were building a future where I didn't belong. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the house where my son lived, where laughter used to echo, where I used to feel welcome. Now it felt like a place I had to be invited into. And even then, only barely tolerated. I got into my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. As I pulled away, one thought kept repeating in my mind. They were planning something bigger than a conversation over dinner. Something they didn't want me to be part of. And I had a feeling. Whatever it was, I was already too late to stop it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word from that dinner over and over again. Every pause, every look. Every carefully chosen sentence that sounded polite on the surface, but carried something colder underneath. By morning, I had stopped asking myself if something was wrong. I knew something was. The question now was how far had it gone? I tried to push the thought away, tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe I was just lonely grieving imagining things that weren't really there. But that illusion didn't last long. 3 days later, I found the first piece of proof. It happened by accident. Or maybe not entirely. Daniel had asked me to stop by his house while he was at work. "Laura's expecting a delivery," he said over the phone. "Can you be there to sign for it?" It was the first time in weeks he had asked me for anything. And for a moment, just a moment, it made me feel needed. So I said yes. When I got there, Laura wasn't home yet. I let myself in with the spare key Daniel had given me years ago, back when I used to come by all the time, back when it felt like I belonged there. The house was quiet, too quiet. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter and waited, glancing occasionally at the front door, expecting to hear footsteps at any moment. But no one came. Minutes passed. Then more. I wandered into the living room, then back into the kitchen, trying to keep myself occupied. That's when I noticed it. A folder. Sitting on the dining table. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't locked away. Just sitting there, like it wasn't important, or like no one expected me to look inside. I shouldn't have touched it. I knew that. But something in me, something that had been building ever since that dinner, pushed me forward. I walked slowly toward the table. The folder was labeled in neat printed text. Property Transition Plan. My heart skipped. Property transition. I hesitated for a second. Then I opened it. The first page was full of legal language, terms I recognized, but not all of them. Trust structures, asset transfers, ownership adjustments. My eyes scanned the page quickly, trying to make sense of it. Then I saw my name, Michael Donovan, listed not as an owner, not as a decision maker, but as a subject, a variable, something to be managed. I flipped to the next page, and that's when my hands started to shake. It was a proposal. A plan to transfer the house Thomas and I had built together into a shared ownership structure under Daniel and Rebecca, effective immediately. There were notes in the margins, handwritten, easier to control long-term, prevents complications, Mother not financially strategic. I stared at that last line for a long time. Mother not financially strategic. Not Mom, not Michael, just Mother. Like I was a case study, a problem, something to be evaluated and solved. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. This wasn't concern. This wasn't protection. This was removal. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to take control. And they were doing it quietly, carefully, without ever telling me. I turned another page. There were timelines, steps, legal procedures already outlined. It wasn't just an idea. It was already in motion. That was when the front door opened. I froze. "Hello?" Laura's voice called out. My heart started pounding. I closed the folder quickly, but not fast enough. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway. Then she stopped, right at the entrance to the dining room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked at the folder in my hands, then at me. And I saw it. Not surprise, not panic, but calculation. "How long have you been here?" she asked. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Long enough," I said quietly. Silence. She walked into the room, slowly setting her purse down with deliberate care. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said. "Not you shouldn't have looked. Not that's private, just you weren't supposed to see it." That told me everything I needed to know. I placed the folder back on the table, my hands still trembling. "You were going to transfer the house," I said. "Without telling me." She didn't deny it. Instead, she crossed her arms. "We were going to handle it in a way that's best for everyone." Everyone. I let out a soft, almost bitter laugh. "Does that include me?" She tilted her head slightly. "Michael, you have to understand." "No," I interrupted. "I don't." For the first time, her expression shifted. Just slightly, enough to show irritation. "This isn't personal," she said. "It's practical." There it was again. Practical. Like I was a financial inconvenience. Like I was something that needed to be optimized. "That's my home," I said, my voice shaking, despite my effort to stay calm. "And it will still be your home," she replied quickly. "Nothing changes for you. Nothing changes. Except everything. Except ownership. Except control. Except the fact that I would no longer have a say in what happened to the one place that still felt like mine." I looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman who had been part of my family for years. And suddenly, I saw her clearly. Not as someone distant, not as someone reserved, but as someone strategic, careful, patient. Someone who had been planning this for a long time. "Daniel knows about this," I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. "Of course." "And Rebecca?" "Yes." The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in around me. They all knew. They had all agreed, and no one had told me. Because in their minds, they didn't have to. I took a step back, then another. "I should go," I said. Laura didn't stop me. She didn't apologize. She didn't even try to explain further, because to her, this wasn't something that needed justification. It was already decided. I grabbed my purse and walked out of the house. My chest tight, my thoughts racing. The cold air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it didn't clear my head. Nothing did, because one truth had settled in completely now. This wasn't just a feeling. This wasn't just distance. This was a plan. A real, legal, structured plan to take control of everything I had left. And the worst part? They thought I wouldn't fight it. They thought I wouldn't even understand it. I got into my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel as a new feeling began to rise inside me. Not sadness, not confusion, something sharper, something stronger. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt angry. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't go home right away. I drove for nearly an hour without a destination, the city lights blurring past me as my thoughts raced faster than I could keep up with them. Everything I had suspected, everything I had tried to dismiss was real. And worse than that, it was organized, planned, written down in black ink, in legal language with timelines and steps already in motion. They hadn't just talked about it. They had prepared for it. By the time I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun had already begun to set, casting long shadows across the front of the house. My house. For now. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at it. This place wasn't just a property. It was where Thomas and I had built a life together, where we raised Daniel and Rebecca, where every holiday, every argument, every moment of joy and pain had taken place. And now it was being reduced to a line item in a plan, something to be transitioned. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. They thought I wouldn't understand, that I wouldn't even notice, that I would just let it happen. They were wrong. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the safe. It was tucked away in the back of the closet in the master bedroom, hidden behind a row of old coats and boxes we hadn't touched since Thomas passed. For a moment, I hesitated. Because opening that safe meant going back. Back to everything I had avoided since losing him. Back to memories that still hurt too much to face. But I forced myself to do it anyway. The lock clicked open. Inside were documents. Old ones, important ones, the kind of things you only look at when you have to. I pulled them out carefully, sitting down on the edge of the bed as I began to sort through them. Deeds, insurance papers, tax records. And then, Thomas's will. My hands slowed. I hadn't read it in full since the day it was finalized. Back then, I trusted everything was in order. Because I trusted him. Now, I needed to be sure. I unfolded the document, my eyes scanning the familiar language. Most of it was exactly as I remembered. Shared assets, protections, provisions for both Daniel and Rebecca. But then I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. A clause. Buried near the end. At first, it didn't seem unusual. But the more I read it, the more my heartbeat quickened. It wasn't just about inheritance, it was about control. Specific conditions under which ownership of certain assets, including the house, could not be transferred without my explicit consent. Even if both children agreed, even if they tried to structure it differently, even if they believed they were acting in the family's best interest. The language was clear, unmistakable. Nothing could be changed without me. Nothing. I sat there in silence, the weight of that realization settling over me. They had made a plan. But it was a plan that might not even be legal. Or at least not as simple as they thought. Which meant one thing. They either didn't know or they didn't care. Neither option made me feel any better. I kept reading, and that's when I saw another name. Not Daniel, not Rebecca. A third party, an attorney. Someone Thomas had worked with years ago. Someone I hadn't thought about in a long time. The name felt familiar, but distant, like a memory just out of reach. I frowned, trying to place it. And then it hit me. A courtroom. Years ago, a case Thomas had been involved in. And a younger man, nervous, unpolished, clearly out of his depth, standing in front of a judge struggling to hold his ground. I had been there that day. Not because I had to be, but because Thomas had asked me to come. Just sit with me, he had said. It might be a long one. I remembered watching that young attorney as the case unfolded, watching him stumble over his words, watching the judge grow impatient, watching the room slowly turn against him. And I remembered what happened next. Something no one else seemed to notice at the time. A small moment, quiet, almost insignificant. But it changed everything. The attorney had misplaced a key document, one that could have cost him the case and possibly his career. There had been confusion, panic, whispered conversations between opposing counsel. And somehow, I had seen it. A folder, left behind on a bench near the back of the courtroom. I hadn't thought twice about it. I simply picked it up and handed it to him during a recess. He had looked at me like I had just pulled him back from the edge of a cliff, and maybe I had. The case turned around after that, completely. He found his footing, regained control. Won. Afterward, he had come up to me, thanking me more times than I could count. "You have no idea what you just did for me," he had said. At the time, I had smiled politely. It was just a folder, I told him. But now, sitting here years later, staring at his name in Thomas's will, I wasn't so sure it had been just a folder. Because this was the same man, the same attorney, and according to this document, he was still connected to our family's legal affairs. Which meant he might be the one who understood exactly what Daniel and Rebecca were trying to do, and whether they could actually do it. I leaned back against the headboard, the pieces slowly starting to come together. They had a plan, but I had something they didn't expect. Information, protection, and possibly an ally. For the first time since I opened that folder at Daniel's house, the panic began to ease just slightly. Not because things were better, but because I wasn't as powerless as they thought. I closed the will, carefully placing it back in the safe, along with the other documents. Then I sat there, in the quiet room, my thoughts sharper now, more focused. They had underestimated me. They thought I wouldn't read the fine print. They thought I wouldn't remember the past. They thought I would simply fade into the background. But they forgot something. I may not have been the one making the money. I may not have been the one speaking the loudest. But I had always been paying attention. And now it was my turn to act. Because if they thought I was going to let them take everything from me without a fight, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The next morning, I didn't wait. For the first time in a long time, I didn't second-guess myself. Didn't hesitate. Didn't try to soften what I already knew was happening. I made the call. My fingers hovered over the number for a moment before pressing it. It had been years since I last spoke to him. Years since that courtroom. Years since that small, almost forgotten moment that now felt anything but small. The phone rang twice, then 3 times. On the 4th ring, someone picked up. "Law offices of Carter and Whitman. This is Sandra speaking." My throat tightened slightly. Yes, hello. I'd like to speak with Mr. Carter. Jonathan Carter. May I ask who's calling? There was a pause. Michael Donovan. Another pause. Longer this time. Please hold. Soft instrumental music filled the line, but I barely heard it. My heart was beating too loudly. My thoughts moving too quickly. What if he didn't remember me? What if this didn't matter to him the way it suddenly mattered to me? What if I had built this entire hope on something insignificant? The music stopped. Then Michael. His voice was older now, deeper, more grounded. But there was something else in it. Recognition. Yes, I said quietly. A brief silence, then a soft exhale. I never thought I'd hear from you again. That alone told me everything. You remember, I said. I remember everything, he replied. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something shift. Not relief, not yet, but possibility. I need help, I said. His tone changed immediately. Sharper, professional, but still warm. Tell me where you are, he said. I'll make time. His office was exactly what I expected. Clean, organized, quiet. The kind of place where every detail was intentional. But what I didn't expect was him. Jonathan Carter stood as I entered, walking toward me with a look that was both surprised and sincere. Michael Donovan, he said, shaking his head slightly. After all these years. I smiled faintly. I didn't think you'd remember me. He let out a small laugh. You saved my career. I opened my mouth to protest, but he raised a hand gently. No, he said. Let me say that properly. He gestured toward a chair. Sit. I did. He remained standing for a moment as if collecting his thoughts. That day, he said slowly, I was about to lose everything. Not just the case. My reputation. My future. I had one chance, and I failed to prepare. I listened quietly. And then you walked up to me, he continued, and handed me that folder like it was nothing. He shook his head again, a faint smile on his lips. It wasn't nothing. The room was silent for a moment. I built everything I have now, starting from that case, he said. Every client, every opportunity. It all came from that turning point. He finally sat down across from me. So, when you say you need help, he added, his voice steady, now you already have it. Something inside me softened, but I didn't let myself get lost in it. Because I wasn't here for the past. I was here for what was happening now. I reached into my bag and pulled out the documents, the copies I had made that morning. I placed them on the table between us. This is what my children are planning, I said. He didn't speak immediately. He simply opened the folder and began reading. His expression changed slowly. Not dramatically, but enough. Focused, serious, careful. He flipped through each page methodically, occasionally pausing, occasionally going back to reread something. I watched him the entire time. Because his reaction mattered more than anything else in that moment. Finally, he leaned back slightly, folding his hands together. How much of this did you already know? He asked. Enough, I said. Not everything. He nodded. They're trying to transfer ownership through a layered structure. He said, trust adjustments, partial control shifts, indirect authority. I swallowed. Can they do it? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, He reached for another document. The will. The one I had brought with me. He scanned it quickly, then again, more slowly. And then he smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but knowingly. No, he said. Just one word. But it hit like a wave. They can't, he repeated more firmly this time. Not without your explicit consent. I felt the air leave my lungs in a quiet rush. They're trying to bypass the clause. He continued, tapping the page lightly. But this language is airtight. Whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were doing. Thomas, I said softly. He nodded. That doesn't surprise me. Silence filled the room again, but this time it felt different, lighter, more controlled. So what happens now? I asked. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his expression sharpening. Now, he said, now we make sure they understand something very clearly. I held his gaze. You're not a passive party in this, he continued. You're the central authority. The words settled into me slowly. Central authority. Not an afterthought. Not a liability. Not something to be managed. Something to be respected. They assumed you wouldn't challenge this, he added. I know, I said quietly. And that assumption, he said, leaning back again, a faint edge in his voice, is their biggest mistake. For the first time since everything began, I felt something close to control. Not fully, not completely, but enough to stand on. What do we do? I asked. Jonathan didn't hesitate. We let them continue, he said. I frowned. What? We don't interrupt them, he clarified. We don't warn them. We don't give them time to adjust. I stared at him. We don't warn them. We don't give them time to adjust. I stared at him, trying to understand. We let them move forward with their plan, he said. And when they do, his voice lowered slightly. We stop it. Him time to adjust. I stared at him, trying to understand. We let them move forward with their plan, he said. And when they do, his voice lowered slightly. We stop it. How? With evidence, he said. With the law. And if necessary. He paused. With a judge. The word hung in the air between us. A judge. Something about that felt significant, but I couldn't quite place why. Not yet. Trust me, Jonathan added. You didn't come here by accident. I exhaled slowly, my hands finally steady. For the first time since I opened that folder in Daniel's house, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just going to be a quiet disagreement. This was going to become something much bigger, something they never expected. And when it did, they were going to realize something far too late. I wasn't the woman they thought I was. Not anymore. I followed Jonathan's advice. That was the hardest part. Not confronting them, not exposing the plan, not demanding answers, just waiting. It went against everything in me. Every instinct I had as a mother, as someone who had spent her entire life protecting, fixing, smoothing over conflicts before they could turn into something worse. But this time, I had to do the opposite. I had to let it unfold and pretend I didn't know. 3 days later, Daniel called. Mom, are you free this weekend? He asked, his voice unusually upbeat. Too upbeat. I stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring out the window at the backyard Thomas had once spent hours tending. I think so, I said carefully. Why, we're having a family meeting, he replied. Just something we need to go over. Nothing serious. Nothing serious. I almost smiled. Of course, I said. What time Saturday? Around noon. It'll be there. When I hung up, I didn't move for a long time. This was it. They were moving forward, exactly like Jonathan predicted. That evening I called him. They set the meeting. When I hung up, I didn't move for a long time. This was it. They were moving forward, exactly like Jonathan predicted. That evening I called him. They set the meeting, I said. Good, he replied calmly. That means they're confident. I let out a slow breath. And that's what we want. That's exactly what we want. There was a pause. Do I say anything, I asked? No, he said immediately. You listen. You let them explain everything. Don't argue. Don't resist. Let them believe you're uncertain. I frowned slightly. Uncertain. Yes, he said. Not weak, not confused. Just no, he said immediately. You listen. You let them explain everything. Don't argue. Don't resist. Let them believe you're uncertain. I frowned slightly. Uncertain? Yes, he said. Not weak, not confused, just unsure. That will make them push harder. And the harder they push, the more they reveal. I understood, and after I asked. He said we respond. Saturday came faster than I expected. I arrived at Daniel's house 5 minutes early. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed those 5 minutes to sit in the car, to steady my breathing, to remind myself what I was doing and why. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't even just about control. It was about something deeper. Respect. Trust. The line they had crossed without even asking. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. Before I could knock it open, Laura stood there, her expression perfectly composed. Michael, she said. Come in. Her tone was polite, measured, like nothing had happened a few days ago, like she hadn't been standing across from me while I held evidence of their plan in my hands. I stepped inside. Rebecca was already there, sitting on the couch, with her husband Mark. Daniel stood near the dining table, papers neatly arranged in front of him. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at all of them. My family. And yet, not. Mom, Daniel said, smiling, as he walked toward me. Thanks for coming. He kissed my cheek lightly, a gesture that felt practiced, not natural, not warm, just expected. Of course, I said. We all sat down. I noticed the seating arrangement immediately. Daniel at the head of the table, Laura beside him, Rebecca and Mark across, and me at the end, alone. It wasn't accidental. Nothing about this was accidental. Daniel cleared his throat, so he began glancing briefly at Laura before looking back at me. We wanted to talk about something important. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. He picked up a document. One of the things we've been thinking about, he continued, is making sure everything is secure for the future. Secure. There it was again. Same word, same tone, different setting. I stayed quiet. We've been reviewing the structure of the house and the estate, he said, and there are some adjustments that would make things easier. Easier for who I didn't ask. Instead, I tilted my head slightly. What kind of adjustments? I asked softly. Laura leaned in slightly, her voice calm. Just some legal structuring, she said. Nothing that changes your day-to-day life. Nothing that changes, except everything. I folded my hands in my lap, nodding slowly. I see, I said. Rebecca spoke next. It's really just about protecting things long-term, she added, making sure nothing gets complicated later. Complicated? I almost laughed. But I didn't. Instead, I let my silence stretch just a little longer than comfortable. Daniel shifted slightly. Then he slid the document across the table toward me. "This outlines everything," he said. I looked down at it. It was cleaner than the version I had seen, more polished, less obvious. But the structure was the same. The intention was the same. They had just removed the parts they didn't want me to notice. Or maybe they thought I wouldn't notice. I picked it up slowly, pretending to read it for the first time, letting my eyes move across the words, even though I already knew what they said. "I don't understand all of this," I said quietly. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't entirely true either. Daniel leaned forward immediately. "That's okay," he said quickly. "We've already gone through it with a legal advisor." Of course they had. "And?" I asked. "It's straightforward," he replied. "It just shifts certain ownership aspects into a shared structure. It makes everything more manageable." "Manageable? For them?" Laura added. "You wouldn't have to worry about anything. We'd handle everything." There it was. The assumption. The quiet underlying belief that I was no longer capable, no longer relevant, no longer necessary. I looked up at them, one by one. Daniel, Rebecca, Laura, Mark. 4 people sitting there presenting this as if it was a favor, as if it was something they were doing for me. And for a brief moment, I let myself feel it. The hurt, the betrayal, the realization that they had all agreed on this without me. Then I let it go. Because this wasn't the moment to react. This was the moment to observe. What would I need to do? I asked. Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Just sign," he said. Of course, just sign. Like it was nothing. Like it was a formality. Like it wasn't the final step in taking control of everything I had left. I looked back down at the paper, letting the silence stretch again, long enough for them to feel it, long enough for them to think. Then I spoke. "I need time," I said. The reaction was immediate, not loud, not dramatic, but visible. Daniel's smile tightened. Rebecca shifted in her seat. Laura's eyes sharpened slightly. "Time," Daniel repeated. "Yes," I said calmly. "I want to understand it better." Laura leaned forward slightly. "Michael, we've already explained, I know," I said gently, "but I'd feel more comfortable if I had someone look at it with me." There it was. The moment. Small, simple, but enough to change the air in the room. Someone Rebecca asked. "Yes," I said. Daniel's expression darkened just a fraction. "Who?" he asked. I met his eyes. An attorney. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. And in that silence I saw it, for the first time. Not confidence, not control, but something else. Concern. Because suddenly, this wasn't as simple as they thought, and they knew it. Laura was the first to recover. "That's not necessary," she said quickly. "This is all standard, I'm sure it is." I interrupted gently. "But I'd still like to be sure." My tone was calm, polite, unshaken. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying me now. Really studying me, as if seeing something he hadn't expected. "You don't trust us?" he asked. The question hung in the air, sharp, loaded, designed to make me hesitate, to make me feel guilty, to push me back into the role they were comfortable with. But this time, I didn't step back. I held his gaze. "I trust you," I said quietly. And then I added, "But this is too important not to understand." Another silence, longer this time. He nodded slowly. Fine, he said. Take your time. But his voice had changed. The warmth was gone, the confidence shaken. And as I sat there holding that document in my hands, I realized something. This wasn't just a family conversation anymore. This was a turning point, because for the first time, I hadn't followed their lead. I had set my own, and they felt it. I didn't rush. That was the second hardest part. After the meeting, I drove home slowly, the document resting on the passenger seat beside me, like something alive, something watching, waiting. They thought I would panic. They thought I would either sign quickly or break down emotionally. But I did neither. Instead, I waited. Exactly like Jonathan told me. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca. Mom, I hope you're not overthinking this. We really just want what's best for you. I stared at the screen for a long time. The words were gentle, carefully chosen. But underneath them, I could feel it. Pressure, expectation, control. I typed a response, then deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Finally, I sent something simple. I understand. I just need a little time. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared. Then came another message. Of course, just don't wait too long. This is time sensitive. Time sensitive. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. That word again. Urgency. They needed urgency. Because urgency meant less thinking, less questioning, less resistance. I set the phone down without resistance. I set the phone down without replying. The next morning, I met Jonathan again. This time, I didn't feel uncertain walking into his office. I felt steady, different, like I was stepping into something I was finally ready for. He noticed it too. You're calmer, replying. The next morning, I met Jonathan again. This time, I didn't feel uncertain walking into his office. I felt steady, different, like I was stepping into something I was finally ready for. He noticed it too. You're calmer, he said as I sat down. I am, I replied, because now I know what they're doing. He nodded slightly. Good. Tell me everything. I described the meeting in detail. Every word, every expression, every shift in tone. I told him how Daniel spoke first, how Laura reinforced how Rebecca softened the edges, how they worked together. Like a team. Jonathan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back, his expression thoughtful. They're coordinated, he said. Yes, I replied. Very. That means this wasn't spontaneous, he added. They've been planning this for a while. I knew that already, but hearing it said out loud made it heavier, more real. They said it was reviewed by a legal advisor, I added. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly. Did they mention who? No. He nodded slowly. That's fine. Well, find out. I leaned forward slightly. What do we do now? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out a legal pad and began writing something down. First, he said we document everything. Everything I asked. Every conversation. Every message. Every document they've given you. Every document they've given you. Every change in their behavior. I nodded slowly. That builds a pattern, he continued. Intent, pressure, coordination. And that matters, I asked. It matters a lot, he said. Especially if this escalates, every change in their behavior, I nodded slowly. That builds a pattern, he continued. Intent, pressure, coordination, and that matters, I asked. It matters a lot, he said, especially if this escalates. Escalates. The word sat between us, heavy, real. Do you think it will? I asked quietly. He looked at me directly. Yes, no hesitation, no softening, just truth. They won't stop easily, he continued. Not if they've already come this far. I felt a chill run through me. They're your family, he added, his voice gentler now. Which makes this more complicated. But legally, he tapped the document again. They're crossing lines. I swallowed. And if they keep going, Jonathan's expression sharpened. Then we respond in a way they can't ignore. I understood what he meant. Or at least I thought I did. But something about it still felt bigger than I expected. 2 days later, Daniel called again. Have you had a chance to review the document? Or at least, I thought I did, but something about it still felt bigger than I expected. 2 days later, Daniel called again. Have you had a chance to review the document, he asked. His tone was polite, controlled, but there was something underneath it now. Tension. Yes, I said. I've started. Started, he repeated. I want to go over it with someone, I added calmly. There was a pause, longer this time. Mom, he said carefully. We already told you it's standard. There's nothing unusual about it. I'm sure there isn't, I replied. But I'd still feel better having someone explain it to me. Mom, he said carefully. We already told you it's standard. There's nothing unusual about it. I'm sure there isn't, I replied. But I'd still feel better having someone explain it to me. Another pause. Then, who are you talking to? He asked. The question was casual, but not really. I could hear it, the edge, the need to know. I haven't decided yet, I said. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't his business. I just want to be careful. Daniel exhaled slowly. You don't need to be careful with us, he said. That one almost broke me, because for a moment, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to go back to a time when that sentence was true, but I couldn't. Not anymore. I know, I said softly, but I still want to understand everything fully. His voice hardened slightly. This process can't drag on Mom. There it was again. Time, pressure, control. I won't let it drag on. I replied, I just need a little more time. Silence. Then, fine, he said. But we need to move forward soon. Soon, always soon. He hung up before I could respond. I lowered the phone slowly, my hand steady now. Because I could see it clearly. They were getting nervous. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table going through old files. Not the documents they gave me. My documents. Thomas's documents. The original will. The notes he had left. The small details I had ignored for years because I trusted that everything was simple. But Thomas had never been simple. He had been careful, deliberate, protective. And as I flipped through those papers, I began to notice something I hadn't before. A pattern. Not just legal structure, but intention, layers, safeguards. Clauses that only made sense if you assumed someone might try to interfere. Someone might try to take control. I froze, my fingers resting on a page I had read dozens of times before, but never really seen. There was a clause, a specific one, buried deep, Not obvious, not emphasized, but unmistakable. My heart started to beat faster, because suddenly, this wasn't just about preventing them from taking control. This was something else, something stronger, something Thomas had put in place long before any of this happened. I grabbed my phone and called Jonathan. "I found something," I said the moment he answered. "Tell me," he replied. I read the clause to him, word for word. There was a long silence on the other end. "Then, Michael," he said slowly. "What I asked? That's not just a protective clause." My grip tightened on the phone. "Then what is it?" Another pause. Then he said something that made my entire body go still. "That's a trigger clause." "A trigger? What does that mean?" I whispered. "It means," he said carefully, "if certain conditions are met, control doesn't just stay with you." I stopped breathing. "It expands, expands." I repeated. "Yes," he said. "It activates additional authority, oversight, legal intervention." My mind raced. Under what conditions, I asked. He didn't answer immediately, and when he finally did, his voice had changed. Lower, heavier. "Attempted coercion," he said. The word hit like a shockwave, or manipulation to transfer ownership. I sat there, completely still, because suddenly, everything clicked. The pressure, the urgency, the coordination, the document. They weren't just trying to convince me. They were trying to push me into something that triggered it. "Michael," Jonathan said quietly, "your husband anticipated this." I closed my eyes, my chest tightening. Thomas. He knew. Somehow, he knew this could happen, and he built something to stop it. "No," Jonathan corrected gently as if reading my thoughts. "Not just to stop it." I opened my eyes slowly. Then what I asked. A pause. Then, to expose it. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Because now, this wasn't just about defending myself. This was something else entirely. Something bigger. Something they had no idea they had already set in motion. And for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't just reacting. I was holding something they didn't even know existed. I didn't tell them. Not about the clause. Not about what Thomas had built. Not yet. Because the moment I revealed it, everything would change. And Jonathan had been very clear. "Let them continue," he said. "Let them commit fully. The stronger their actions, the stronger your position." So I stayed quiet, and I waited. 2 days later, Laura showed up unannounced. I was in the living room, sorting through old photographs, something I had started doing more often lately. Not just for nostalgia, but because it reminded me of who we used to be, who they used to be. The doorbell rang sharply. Not hesitant, not casual. Firm, purposeful. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Laura stood there, perfectly composed, as always, dressed in a tailored cream blazer, her hair pulled back neatly. "Michael," she said with a polite smile. "I was in the neighborhood." Of course she was. "Come in," I said. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room briefly, taking everything in, always assessing. We sat across from each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned forward slightly. "I wanted to check in," she said, "about the document." There it was, straight to it. "I'm still reviewing it," I replied calmly. Her smile tightened just a fraction. "I understand," she said, "but Daniel's getting concerned." Concerned, not about me, About the delay. I told him I needed time, I said. Yes, she replied, but this isn't something that should take long. I met her gaze steadily. Not for you, I said gently. But for me, it is. She paused, studying me, and I could see it. She was recalculating, trying to figure out why I wasn't reacting the way she expected. Michael, she said, her tone softening, we're trying to help you. I nodded slowly. I know. You don't have to do everything alone anymore. She continued. We can take care of things. There it was again, that quiet assumption that I was less now, that I needed them, that they were stepping in to replace something I had lost. I've been taking care of things for a long time, I said. My voice wasn't defensive. It wasn't angry, just factual. Yes, she said quickly, and you've done an amazing job. But things change. Things change. I almost smiled. Yes, I said softly, they do. She leaned in a little more. This is about protecting your future, she added, making sure everything is handled properly. I held her gaze. And whose idea was it, I asked? That caught her off guard, just for a second. But I saw it. It was a group decision, she said. A group? Of course. All of you? I asked. Yes, she replied. I nodded slowly, letting that settle, letting her sit with it. Without me, I added quietly. Silence. A brief flicker of discomfort crossed her face. We didn't want to overwhelm you, she said. No, you didn't want me to question you, but I didn't say that. Instead, I leaned back slightly. I'll let you know when I'm ready, I said. Her posture stiffened. Michael, she said carefully, this really shouldn't be delayed. I tilted my head slightly. Why not? Another pause. Longer this time, because now she had to choose her words carefully. Because timing matters in legal matters, she said finally. I nodded. I agree. And then I added, that's exactly why I'm being careful. Her lips pressed together slightly. The conversation wasn't going the way she expected. Not at all. She stood up. Well, she said, smoothing her jacket, I hope you'll make a decision soon. I will, I replied. She walked toward the door, then paused, turning back. Daniel's just trying to do what's best for you, she said. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't before. Not just calculation, not just control, but something deeper, ambition. This wasn't just about helping Daniel or helping me. This was about something she wanted, something she was pushing toward. I'm sure he believes that, I said softly. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then left. That night, I called Jonathan again. She came to my house, I said. Alone, he asked. Yes. Good, he said. Good. I repeated. Yes, he replied. That means they're splitting roles now, applying pressure from different angles. I leaned back in my chair. It felt like that. It is that, he said, and it's escalating. I hesitated. Is that enough? I asked. For the clause, he clarified. Yes. There was a pause. Not yet, he said, but it's getting close. Close. My heart beat a little faster. What else do they need to do? I asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, they need to cross a line that can't be explained as concern. I understood. This still looks like concern, I asked. To an outsider, he said. Yes, barely, but yes. I exhaled slowly. So we wait. Yes. always waiting. But this time, it felt different. Because now, I knew what I was waiting for. The next move came sooner than I expected. The following afternoon, Daniel and Rebecca both called. Not separately, together, a group call. I stared at the phone for a moment before answering. "Hi, Mom," Rebecca said brightly. "Hi," I replied. Daniel's voice followed. "We just wanted to check in again." Again, of course. "I told Laura," I said. "I'm still reviewing everything." "We know," Rebecca said quickly. We're a little worried. Worried about what I asked." There was a brief silence. Then Daniel spoke. "That you're overcomplicating this." There it was. Direct, clear, honest. "I don't think understanding something fully is overcomplicating," I said. "It's not complicated," he insisted. "It is to me," I replied. Rebecca jumped in. "Mom, you trust us, right?" The question again. Same trap, different voice. "I trust you," I said. "Then why do you need someone else?" Daniel pressed. "Because you've already gone behind my back. Because you've already tried to take control without telling me. Because I can't recognize the people sitting across from me anymore." But I didn't say any of that. "I just want to be sure," I said calmly. Another silence. Then, "Are you planning to refuse?" Daniel asked. There it was, the shift. From persuasion to pressure. I felt it immediately. The tone, the edge, the underlying frustration. "I'm planning to understand," I said. "That's not what I asked," he replied. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. "I know," I said quietly. "And I'm not answering that question yet." Rebecca sighed softly. "Mom," but Daniel cut her off. "No," he said. "We need clarity. Clarity. Now. Urgency again. Pressure again. Everything stacking up." "I'll give you clarity when I'm ready," I said. My voice was still calm, but firm now. Unmistakable. There was a long silence. Then Daniel spoke again. And this time, there was no softness left. "No," he said. "That's not how this works." The words landed hard, sharp, final. I felt something inside me shift. Because in that moment, there was a long silence. Then Daniel spoke again. And this time, there was no softness left. "No," he said. "That's not how this works." The words landed hard, sharp, final. I felt something inside me shift. Because in that moment, he wasn't asking anymore. He was telling. And that was the line. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch. Let the weight of his words settle between us. Then I said something very simple. "Yes," I said. "That is exactly how this works." Another silence. But this one was different. Tense. Unstable. Because something had changed. Not just in me, but in them. They could feel it. The shift. The resistance. The fact that I wasn't bending anymore. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Fine," he said. "Then don't expect us to just sit around forever." I didn't react, didn't argue, didn't defend, because now I didn't need to. "Do what you need to do," I said, and I meant it. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what they would do next. I was waiting for it. After the call ended, I sat there in silence, the phone still in my hand, my heart steady, my mind clear. because now they had crossed it. Not completely, but enough. Enough to show intent. Enough to reveal pressure. Enough to shift the balance. I picked up the document again, looked at it one more time, then set it down, and reached for my phone. I called Jonathan.
They pushed,
I said.
How far?
He asked. I took a slow breath.
Far enough,
I replied. There was a pause. Then, good, he said quietly. And for the first time, that word quietly, and for the first time, that word didn't feel strange. It felt inevitable. Because now, we weren't waiting anymore. We were moving. The next step didn't come from me. It came from them. And it came faster than even Jonathan expected. 3 days after that call, I received an official letter. Not a message, not a phone call. A letter delivered by certified mail. I stood in my entryway staring at the envelope in my hands. My name printed in bold, formal type. Michael Donovan. Underneath it, a law firm's name I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. This wasn't pressure anymore. This was escalation. I opened it slowly, carefully, as if the act itself might change what was inside. But it didn't. The words were clear, cold, legal. They were requesting a formal review of my capacity to manage financial and estate responsibilities. My fingers went still. I read the sentence again and again, because I needed to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding. But I wasn't. They were questioning my capacity, my ability to make decisions, my independence, my mind. I sank slowly into the chair beside the door, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. This was no longer subtle. This was no longer hidden behind concern. This was an attack. I called Jonathan immediately. They filed something, I said. What kind of filing, he asked, already alert. I read the letter to him, word for word. There was a long silence when I finished. Then, they did it, he said quietly. My throat tightened. Did what they crossed the line. The words settled over me like something heavy but solid, real, unavoidable. So, this is enough? I asked. Yes, he said firmly. This is exactly what we needed. The word felt strange, because to me, this felt like something breaking. But to him, this was proof. This is coercion through legal pressure, he continued, and it directly ties to control over your assets. I closed my eyes briefly. They're trying to declare me incompetent, I said. Yes, he replied, or at least create doubt, enough to justify intervention. My chest tightened. They think I won't fight it. I know, he said. That's why this works in your favor. I let out a slow breath. Tell me what to do. His voice shifted, focused, precise. First, don't respond to them directly. I won't. Sakon, bring me that letter. Immediately, I let out a slow breath. Tell me what to do. His voice shifted, focused, precise. First, don't respond to them directly. I won't. Second, bring me that letter. Immediately. I will. And Michael. I paused. Yes. This activates the clause. My heart skipped. Now I asked. Yes, he said. Now. An hour later, I was sitting across from him again, the letter laid out on his desk. He read it carefully. Once, then again. Then he looked up at me. They didn't just cross the line, he said. They walked straight through it. I swallowed, What happens next? He leaned back slightly, folding his hands. Now, he said, we respond. But there was something in his tone, something I hadn't heard before. Not just strategy, not just control, something heavier. Jonathan, I said quietly, what does respond mean? He held my gaze. It means we initiate enforcement. The word hit harder than I expected. Enforcement.
This isn't just about stopping them anymore, he continued. This is about activating the full legal structure your husband put in place.
I looked down at the letter again.
They don't know, I said.
No, he agreed. They don't. And when they find out, he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into a folder and pulled out another document, one I hadn't seen before.
This,
he said, placing it in front of me,
is what the clause triggers.
I looked at it slowly, carefully, trying to understand. But as I read, my breath caught. Because this wasn't just protection. This was control. Structured. Legal. Binding. This gives oversight authority to an external trustee, I said slowly. Yes, he confirmed, and limits their ability to access or influence any estate decisions. Yes. And my voice stopped, because the next line, it changed everything, and initiates a formal review of any party attempting coercion or manipulation. I looked up at him.
They'll be investigated,
I asked.
Yes,
he said.
Legally.
My heart started to beat faster. Jonathan, yes, they're my children. His expression softened slightly. I know. I said. Eshin softened slightly. I know. I shook my head slowly. I didn't want this to turn into this. I understand, he said gently. But they made a choice. I closed my eyes briefly. Because that was the truth. Hard, sharp, unavoidable. They could have come to you honestly. He continued. They didn't. They could have respected your authority. They didn't. They could have protected you. They didn't. Each sentence landed like a weight. Not loud, not aggressive, just undeniable. So now he finished, we proceed. The process moved quickly after that, faster than anything before. Jonathan filed a response. Formal, immediate, not just denying their claims, but invoking the clause. Fully. And once that happened, everything changed. 2 days later, Daniel called again. But this time, his voice was different. No control, no calm, just confusion.
Mom, he said, what is going on?
I sat at the kitchen table, the phone resting in my hand.
What do you mean? I asked. We just got contacted by a legal trustee, he said. They're requesting documentation, financial records.
He stopped suddenly. What did you do?
There it was. Not concern, not worry, accusation. I responded. I said simply, to what he demanded.
To the letter you sent me. Silence. Then,
that wasn't from us,
he said quickly. I almost smiled. Daniel, I said softly, it was initiated on your behalf.
That's not the same thing, he snapped.
No, but it was enough. You questioned my ability to make decisions, I said. We were trying to protect you. There it was again. The justification. The same words. The same tone. But now they sounded different, weaker, because the structure behind them had shifted. You didn't talk to me, I said.
We tried,
he argued. No, I replied calmly.
You informed me.
Silence. Then, what is this clause? He asked suddenly. I didn't answer immediately, because I knew that question. It wasn't curiosity. It was fear. You don't need to worry about it, I said.
I do need to worry about it, he snapped, because now we're being investigated. There it was. The realization. Too late.
That's what happens, I said quietly, when lines are crossed. Another silence, but this one was different. Not tense, not confrontational, just heavy, because now he understood. Not everything, but enough. You're going too far, he said finally. I felt something inside me settle. Deep, solid. No, I said. I'm finally going exactly as far as I need to. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time. The house quiet around me, the weight of everything settling in. This wasn't what I had wanted. Not really. I had wanted honesty, respect, a conversation. But instead, we were here. And now the weight of everything settling in. This wasn't what I had wanted. Not really. I had wanted honesty, respect, a conversation. But instead, we were here. And now, there was no going back. That evening, Jonathan called. They've responded, he said. How I asked, through their attorney. Of course they had one. What are they saying? He paused briefly. They're claiming misunderstanding, concern. No intent to coerce. I let out a quiet breath. Of course they are.
But he added, it doesn't change the facts.
I nodded slowly. And the process continues.
Yes.
I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Because now, it was happening, fully, unstoppable. Michael, he said gently, you're doing the right thing. I closed my eyes. Am I? The question lingered, heavy, complicated, but underneath it, there was something else, clarity. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't being pushed. I wasn't being controlled. I wasn't being silenced. I was standing, firm, unmoving. And whatever came next, I would face it. Not as someone they could manage, not as someone they could pressure, but as someone they had underestimated. The first official meeting was scheduled for the following week. Not in a courtroom, not yet, but close enough. A private legal conference room in downtown Chicago. Neutral ground. Controlled. Professional. And as Jonathan explained it, strategic. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of my mirror longer than I expected. Not adjusting my clothes, not fixing my hair, just looking at myself. At the woman they thought they could replace. Control. Question. I didn't look weak. I didn't look confused. And I certainly didn't look like someone who needed permission to manage her own life. But I did look older. And for the first time, I understood how they might have convinced themselves of their story. That age meant vulnerability. That experience meant dependence. That time meant decline. They weren't just trying to take control. They were justifying it to themselves. That realization hurt more than anything else. Jonathan met me outside the building. You ready? He asked. I nodded. I think so. He studied my face for a moment. You don't have to be perfect in there, he said. You just have to be clear. Clear? I could do that. We walked inside together. They were already there. Daniel, Rebecca, Laura, and a man I didn't recognize, presumably their attorney.
They all turned when I entered, and for a moment, no one spoke. Because something had changed. Not just legally, personally, visibly. I didn't hesitate, didn't pause. I walked straight to the chair across from them and sat down. Jonathan took the seat beside me. The trustee, an older woman named Margaret Hale, sat at the head of the table, calm, composed, observing everything. "Thank you all for being here," she said. Her voice was steady, measured. "This meeting is to review the recent filings and determine appropriate next steps under the Donovan estate provisions." Estate provisions. They shifted slightly at the word. Because now, this wasn't about helping Mom. This was about something formal, something binding, something they couldn't control. Margaret turned to me. "Mrs. Donovan," she said, "do you understand the purpose of this meeting?" I met her gaze. "Yes," I said clearly. "And do you feel capable of representing your own interests today?" The question hung in the air. Heavy, loaded, intentional. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. "Completely." She nodded once, then turned to Daniel. "Mr. Donovan, your party initiated a request regarding your mother's decision-making capacity. Would you like to clarify your position?" Daniel shifted in his seat. For the first time since this began, he didn't look confident. He looked uncertain. "We were concerned," he said, "about HOE handling of financial matters." Daniel shifted in his seat. For the first time since this began, he didn't look confident. He looked uncertain. "We were concerned," he said, "about her handling of financial matters." Margaret didn't react. "Based on what evidence?" she asked. He hesitated. "Then recent behavior," he said. I almost smiled. Because now we were here, where words mattered, where vague concerns weren't enough. "Can you be specific?" she asked. Another pause. Longer, more uncomfortable. "Well, she's been isolated," he said. "Making decisions without consulting us." I leaned forward slightly. "Since when is independence a sign of incapacity?" I asked calmly. He looked at me, caught off guard. "That is not what I meant." "It's exactly what you said," I replied. My voice wasn't raised, but it was firm, clear, unshakable. Margaret raised a hand slightly. "Let's keep this structured," she said. Then she turned back to Daniel. "Do you have any medical evaluations supporting your claim?" "No," he admitted. "Any financial mismanagement documented number, any legal findings of diminished capacity number." Each answer landed harder than the last. "Because now, do you have any medical evaluations supporting your claim?" "No," he admitted. "Any financial mismanagement documented?" "No." "Any legal findings of diminished capacity?" "No." Each answer landed harder than the last. Because now there was nowhere to hide. Margaret nodded slowly. "Then your claim is based solely on personal concern." "Yes," he said, but his voice lacked conviction now. She made a note, then turned to Rebecca. "Do you share this position?" Rebecca hesitated, looking between Daniel and me. "I just wanted to make sure everything was handled properly," she said softly. "Not a claim, not an argument, just distance." Margaret nodded again, then turned to Laura. "And you?" Laura straightened slightly. "We believed oversight would be beneficial," she said carefully. Margaret's eyes narrowed just slightly. Beneficial to whom? Pause. Then to the family. There it was, the word, family, used as justification, as shield, as excuse. Margaret didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to Jonathan. "Mr. Reeves?" Jonathan leaned forward slightly.
Under Clause 7 of the Donovan estate structure, he said, any attempt to exert control through legal or coercive means triggers protective oversight. He gestured toward the letter. This filing qualifies?
Margaret nodded slowly.
Yes,
she said.
It does.
Daniel's head snapped up.
Wait, this isn't coercion, he said quickly. This was concern.
Margaret looked at him calmly. Concern does not involve legal action against a competent individual, she said. Silence, heavy, final. Because now it was official. Not my opinion, not Jonathan's strategy, but an external authority confirming it. They had crossed the line. The rest of the meeting unfolded exactly as Jonathan predicted. Documentation was requested, access was restricted, authority was clarified. But the moment that changed everything came near the end. Margaret folded her hands and looked at all of us. There is one additional matter, she said. Everyone went still.
Based on the activation of Clause 7, she continued, a historical review has been initiated. I felt something shift beside me. Jonathan remained still. But I could feel it, the anticipation.
Daniel frowned.
What does that mean?
He asked.
Margaret glanced briefly at a file in front of her.
It means we are reviewing prior legal interactions connected to this estate, she said. Then she looked at me. And those connected to Mrs. Donovan personally. I frowned slightly. I hadn't expected that. What kind of interactions, I asked. She held my gaze for a moment, then said something that made the entire room freeze. Including a case from over 20 years ago, she said. My breath caught, because I knew exactly which case she meant. I hadn't thought about it in years, hadn't needed to. But now, it was back. Daniel looked confused.
What case? He asked.
Margaret turned a page slowly.
A professional disciplinary hearing involving a young attorney, she said.
Jonathan went completely still beside me, because he knew.
He knew before she even said the name. A man named Jonathan Reeves.
Silence, absolute, stunning. I turned my head slowly, looking at Jonathan. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Daniel blinked. What does that have to do with anything he asked? Margaret closed the file gently. It has everything to do with context, she said. Then she looked directly at me.
Mrs. Donovan,
she said,
would you like to explain your involvement in that case?
My heart started to beat faster. Because this was the moment. The one thing I had never told them, never used, never needed to, until now. I looked at my children, at their confusion, their frustration, their unraveling control. And then I spoke. Yes, I said quietly. I think it's time I did. For a moment, I didn't speak. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew that once I started, everything would change. Again. I looked at Jonathan. He gave me the smallest nod. Not permission, not instruction, just acknowledgement. This was my story, and it was time I told it. 22 years ago, I began slowly. I wasn't who you think I was. Daniel frowned. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. Laura folded her arms, already defensive. I wasn't just your mother, I continued, and I wasn't just your father's wife. I paused. I was working. That seemed to surprise them. Working. As if the idea itself didn't fit into the version of me they had created. What kind of work? Daniel asked. I met his eyes. Legal consulting. That got Jonathan's attention, even though he already knew. I could feel it beside me, the memory, the connection. I worked with attorneys. I continued. Mostly behind the scenes. Case preparation, strategy, research. Rebecca blinked. You never told us that. No, I said simply. I didn't, because I hadn't needed to. Because it hadn't defined me. Because I had chosen to step away. For them. It was before your father's business really took off, I said. Before everything became bigger. I took a breath. And one of those cases was Jonathan's. The room went still again. Not shocked this time, but adjusting, reframing, because suddenly he wasn't just my lawyer. He wasn't just some external professional. He was connected to me, to my past, in a way they had never imagined. He was young, I said, glancing at him briefly. Talented, but untested. Jonathan didn't react, but I could feel the weight of that moment between us. And he made a mistake. I continued. Daniel leaned forward. What kind of mistake? I held his gaze. The kind that ends careers. Silence. Because now they were listening. Really listening. It was a litigation case, I said. Complex. High stakes. Corporate liability. I didn't go into unnecessary detail. They didn't need legal specifics. They needed the truth. He overlooked a critical piece of evidence. I continued. Not intentionally, but it happened. Jonathan exhaled quietly, almost imperceptibly. But opposing counsel found it, I said, and they used it. Rebecca's hand moved slightly on the table, as if she could feel the tension in the story. The case turned, I said, fast, and the blame, I said, it fell on him. What happened? Rebecca's hand moved slightly on the table, as if she could feel the tension in the story. The case turned, I said, fast. And the blame, I said, fast. And the blame, said, it fell on him. What happened? Laura asked. Her voice wasn't defensive anymore, just curious. He was reported, I said, for professional negligence. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. That's serious. Yes, I said, it is CED. It fell on him. What happened? Laura asked. Her voice wasn't defensive anymore. Just curious. He was reported, I said, for professional negligence. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. That's serious. Yes, I said. It is. It goes before a disciplinary board. They review everything, and if they find fault, I let the sentence hang. Because they could finish it. Disbarment, career over. Life changed. So what did you do? Rebecca asked softly. I looked at HDO. Rebecca asked softly. I looked at HER. And for a moment, I saw something different. Not calculation, not distance, just a daughter trying to understand her mother. I reviewed the case, I said. Everything, ER. And for a moment, I saw something different. Not calculation, not distance, just a daughter trying to understand her mother. I reviewed the case, I said. Everything, every document, every timeline, every decision. I leaned forward slightly, and I saw something no one else had. Daniel frowned. What? It wasn't negligence, I said. It was misdirection. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Complicated. The opposing counsel had been complicated. The opposing counsel had manipulated the timeline. I continued, subtly, legally, but deliberately. Jonathan looked down briefly. Because he remembered. Because he knew exactly what I was referring to. They buried key information in procedural filings and manipulated the timeline. I continued, Subtly, legally, but deliberately. Jonathan looked down briefly. Because he remembered, because he knew exactly what I was referring to. They buried key information in procedural filings, I said. Documents most people skim, but I didn't skim. I let that sit for a moment. I found it, I said.
And I proved it.
The room was completely still now. Even Margaret had stopped writing, listening, watching. Understanding the weight of W hat was being said. You defended him, and I proved it. The room was completely still now. Even Margaret had stopped writing, listening, watching. Understanding the weight of what was being said. You defended him, Daniel asked quietly. I shook my head. No, I said. I did more than that. I held his gaze. I saved him. The words landed, not dramatic, not loud, but final. Because they were true, and there was no way to soften them. I presented the findings to the board. I continued. Not as his advocate, but as a neutral analyst. They verified everything, and the case collapsed. I leaned back slightly. The complaint was dismissed. His record was cleared, and his career continued. No one spoke, because now they understood. Not just what had happened, but what it meant. Jonathan finally looked at me, really looked, and there was something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Gratitude. Not new, not sudden, but remembered. You never told us, Rebecca said again. Her voice was quieter now. Different. No, I said, because it wasn't something I needed recognition for. I paused. And because it wasn't something I ever planned to use. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. But you are using it now, he said. There it was, the shift back, the defensiveness, the discomfort. I met his eyes calmly. No, I said. I'm explaining it now because you need to understand something. I leaned forward again, slowly, deliberately. You questioned my judgment, I said. You questioned my ability to... I said. You questioned my ability to make decisions. You questioned my capacity to understand complex situations. I held his gaze, unblinking. And yet the man sitting beside me built his entire career on a moment when I saw what no one else could. Make decisions. You questioned my capacity to understand complex situations. I held his gaze, unblinking, and yet the man sitting beside me built his entire career on a moment when I saw what no one else could. Silence. Sharp. Unavoidable. This isn't about power, I continued. It's not about control.
It's about reality. I gestured slightly around the room. You created a version of me that was convenient, safe, manageable. But that version... I shook my head. It's not real. Laura looked down at the table. Rebecca's eyes were glassy. Daniel looked like he didn't know where to look at all. Margaret finally spoke. Thank you, Mrs. Donovan, she said quietly. Her tone had changed too. Respect. Clear. Undeniable. She turned to the others. This context is highly relevant, she said. It directly contradicts the claim of diminished capacity. Daniel swallowed. We didn't know, he said, and for the first time, it didn't sound like an excuse. It sounded like truth.
No, I said softly.
You didn't, because you never asked. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the legal filing, not the pressure, not the attempted control, but the assumption that they already knew who I was, without ever really looking. The meeting ended shortly after that, not because everything was resolved, but because something fundamental had shifted. The narrative, the perception, the balance. As we stood to leave, Daniel hesitated. "Mom." I turned. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally. I didn't know he said again. I studied his face for a moment, and I believed him. But belief didn't erase what had happened. "I know," I said. And then I walked out. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, but not easier. Because this wasn't over. Not yet, but for the first time. The truth was no longer hidden. And that changed everything. Hidden. And that changed everything. The silence that followed us out of that room didn't end when the door closed. It followed us into the hallway, into the elevator, into the space between breaths. Jonathan didn't speak at first. Neither did I. Because there was nothing left to explain. Not legally, not strategically. Everything important had already been said, and yet everything still felt unfinished. When we reached the lobby, he finally turned to me. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. I knew what he meant. Not the legal part, the personal part, the story, the truth I had kept hidden for over 2 decades. "I know," I said. But they needed to hear it. He studied me for a moment. "And you?" he asked. "Did you need to say it?" That question lingered, because I hadn't asked myself that. Not until now. I exhaled slowly. Maybe I admitted, or maybe I just needed them to stop seeing me as someone am not. Jonathan nodded. That part. Because I hadn't asked myself that. Not until now. I exhaled slowly. Maybe, I admitted, or maybe I just needed them to stop seeing me as someone I'm not. Jonathan nodded. That part, he said, you handled perfectly. We stepped outside. The city moved around us like nothing had changed. Cars, people, noise, life continuing. But for me, everything felt slightly shifted. Like a lens had been adjusted, and now I was seeing everything more clearly. "I should prepare you," Jonathan said after a moment. "For what?" "They're not done," he said. I frowned slightly. "The legal claim is weak now," he continued. "But this isn't just about legal control anymore." I knew he was right. It hadn't been for a while. "This is about perception," he said. "Reputation. Influence." I crossed my arms lightly. "They already tried that," I said, "and it didn't work." He gave me a look. "That was the first move," he said. "And now they'll try something else." I didn't like the way that sounded. Not because I was afraid, but because I was tired. Tired of being positioned, evaluated, handled. But I also knew something had changed. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was aware. And awareness changes everything. "What kind of something else?" I asked. Jonathan hesitated. "Pressure," he said. "Emotional, social, possibly financial." I let that sink in. "They may try to isolate you," he added. "Convince others you're unstable, or that you've been influenced." I almost laughed. "Influenced by you?" I asked. "Exactly." "They may try to isolate you," he added. "Convince others you're unstable, or that you've been influenced." I almost laughed. Influenced by you, I asked. Exactly. I shook my head. That won't work. You'd be surprised, he said. That part stayed with me, because he wasn't warning me about strangers. He was warning me about my own family. That afternoon I went home, not to rest, not to escape, but to think, really think, about what came next. The house felt different, not empty, but quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful, more like waiting. I set my bag down and walked slowly into the living room. Everything was exactly where it had always been. The furniture, the photographs, the life we had built together. And yet, it didn't feel the same, because now I could see the gaps, the things that had been assumed, ignored, left unspoken. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Rebecca. I stared at it for a moment, then answered. Hello? Her voice was hesitant. Mom, can we talk? I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to choose how this conversation would begin. Yes, I said, finally. Of course. She came over an hour later. Alone. That mattered, more than she probably realized. When I opened the door, she looked different, not polished, not composed, just human. Hi, she said softly. Hi. I stepped aside to let her in. We sat in the kitchen. Not the living room, not the formal space, just the kitchen, where things had always been simpler, more honest. I didn't know, she said again. I nodded. I believe you. She looked relieved, but also unsettled. Then why didn't you ever tell us, she asked. There it was, the question beneath everything. I folded my hands lightly on the table. Because I didn't think I needed to, I said. That part of my life, it was over. But it wasn't gone, she said. No, I agreed. It wasn't. She looked down at her hands. I feel like I don't know you, she said quietly. That hurt, but not in the way she expected. Not as an accusation, but as a realization. That goes both ways, I said gently. She looked up, surprised. What do you mean? I said you made decisions about me without asking who I actually am. Her expression tightened slightly. We were trying to help, I know, I said. And I meant it, but intention doesn't erase impact. You didn't trust me, I said. The words were calm, but firm. And that's what this is really about. She didn't argue, because she couldn't. I trusted you, she said after a moment. But I also trusted Daniel. I nodded slowly. And when those two things conflicted, she didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. I'm not asking you to choose, I said. I'm asking you to think. For yourself. For once. Tears filled her eyes. I thought I was, she whispered. I believed her. That was the hardest part. She hadn't acted out of cruelty. She had acted out of alignment, with the loudest voice, the strongest presence, the easiest narrative. Daniel's always been certain, she said. Yes, I replied, and certainty can be very persuasive. We sat in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, just real. Is he wrong? She asked finally. I met her eyes. About me, I asked. She nodded. Yes, I said, completely. She let out a slow breath. I think I know that now, she said. But knowing something and undoing what you've done? She shook her head slightly. That's harder. Yes, I said. It is. She nodded.
Yes, I said, completely. She let out a slow breath. I think I know that now, she said. But knowing something and undoing what you've done? She shook her head slightly. That's harder. Yes, I said. It is. She looked at me again. Can we fix it? She asked. The question hung between us. Fragile, honest, and for the first time in this entire situation, not strategic, not defensive, just hopeful. I don't know, I said truthfully. Not yet. Her face fell slightly. But am willing to try, I added. And that changed everything. Because forgiveness isn't immediate, it isn't automatic. But willingness is where it begins. Her face fell slightly. But I'm willing to try, I added. And that changed everything. Because forgiveness isn't immediate, it isn't automatic. But willingness is where it begins. She nodded slowly. Me too, she said. When she left the house didn't feel as heavy. Not lighter exactly, but less closed. Like something had shifted, just enough. But not everything, because one conversation doesn't resolve a conflict this deep. And there was still one person who hadn't come. Daniel. That night, as I sat alone, I realized something. This wasn't just about proving them wrong, or protecting myself. It was about redefining the relationship, on my terms. With truth, with clarity, with boundaries. And Daniel was going to be the hardest part of that. Because unlike Rebecca, he didn't doubt himself. He doubled down. Which meant the next conversation wouldn't be quiet, or reflective, or gentle. It would be something else entirely. And I was finally ready for it. Daniel didn't call. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even the day after that. If this had been the old version of me, I would have reached out first. I would have tried to smooth things over. Explain again. Soften the truth so it would be easier for him to accept. But that version of me was gone. Instead, I waited. Not passively, not helplessly, but intentionally. Because for once, I wasn't chasing understanding. I was allowing space for it to come to me, or not come at all. 3 days later, it finally happened. A knock at the door. Not a call, not a text, a knock. I knew it was him before I even opened it. There was something about the rhythm, firm, controlled, almost impatient. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there. Exactly as I expected, composed, pressed shirt, tension sitting just beneath the surface. Mom, he said. Daniel. I stepped aside. Come in. He didn't hesitate, but he didn't relax either. He walked into the living room like a man entering unfamiliar territory. Which in a way, he was. We didn't sit immediately. We stood across from each other, a few feet apart, enough distance to feel. I talked to Rebecca, he said. I nodded. I figured you would. He exhaled slowly. She thinks we were wrong. There it was, not an apology, not even an acknowledgement, just a report. And you? I asked. He hesitated, only for a second, but I saw it. I think we made decisions with incomplete information, he said, carefully chosen words, legally neutral, emotionally guarded. I almost smiled, because that was exactly how he approached everything. Control the language, control the narrative, control the outcome. And now that you have more information, I asked. He met my eyes. I think things are more complicated than we realized. That wasn't an answer. Not really. It was a repositioning. I crossed my arms lightly. Complicated how? He took a step closer. Not aggressively, but deliberately. Mom, what you did years ago, what you told us, it changes things. Yes, I said, it does. Complicated how? He took a step closer. Not aggressively, but deliberately. Mom, what you did years ago, what you told us, it changes things. Yes, I said, it does. But it doesn't change everything, he added quickly. There it was. The resistance. No, I said calmly, it doesn't. He looked almost relieved, as if he had expected me to argue, to push. But I didn't, because I understood something he didn't yet. This conversation wasn't about winning. What are you trying to say, Daniel? I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare crack in his composure. I'm saying, he paused searching for the right angle. Saying that just because you were capable then? I raised an eyebrow. He hesitated again. I mean, you are capable, he corrected. But that doesn't mean you're making the best decisions now, for the right angle. I'm saying that just because you were capable then, I raised an eyebrow. He hesitated again. I mean, you are capable, he corrected. But that doesn't mean you're making the best decisions now. There it was. Not softened, not hidden, the core belief. Still intact. And what decision are you referring to? I asked. He didn't hesitate this time. Jonathan. I nodded slowly. Of course. I don't trust him, Daniel said. I know you don't, I replied. And I think he's influencing you, he continued. And I know you think that, I said. He frowned. You're not taking this seriously. I met his gaze, steady and calm. I'm taking it very seriously, I said. I'm just not agreeing with you. That unsettled him. I could see it. Because disagreement to Daniel wasn't just difference. It was opposition. Mom, he said, his voice tightening. You have to understand how this looks. I tilted my head slightly. To who? To everyone, he said. To the family? To people who know you? To you, I said. He didn't deny it. You're aligning yourself with a lawyer who has a vested interest in your decisions, he continued. Actually, I said calmly, I'm working with a lawyer who respects my decisions. That's not the same thing, he snapped. No, I agreed, it's not. We stood there for a moment, the air between us tightening. You think I'm being manipulated? I said. Yes, he answered immediately. You think I'm vulnerable? Yes. You think you're protecting me? Yes. I nodded slowly. Then let me ask you something. He waited. What would it take, I said, for you to believe that I'm not? He frowned. That's not how this works. No, I interrupted gently. That's exactly how this works. He didn't respond, because he didn't have an answer. Not one that didn't contradict everything he had already decided. You've already made your conclusion, I said, and now you're trying to fit reality into it. That's not fair, he said sharply. No, I replied, it's accurate. He turned away for a moment, pacing slightly, trying to regain control. I'm trying to prevent you from making a mistake, he said finally. And I'm trying to live my life, I replied. He stopped pacing, turned back to me. This affects more than just you, he said. How I asked. Our family, our reputation, the estate. I raised my hand slightly. There it is. He froze. This isn't just about concern, I said. It's about control.
That's not true. It is, I said calmly, and you don't even see it. His jaw tightened. I'm thinking long term. So am I replied. But your version of long term assumes that I'm not capable of managing it myself. He didn't answer. Because again, he couldn't. I built this life with your father, I said quietly. I supported him before there was anything to support. I made decisions that affected all of us, decisions you benefited from. I stepped closer, not aggressively, but firmly. And now you're telling me I can't make my own decisions? The silence that followed was heavy. Not explosive, not dramatic, just undeniable. I'm not saying you can't, he said finally. I'm saying you shouldn't do it alone. I held his gaze. I'm not alone. He shook his head. That's exactly what I mean. We stood there facing each other. Two people, same family, same history, completely different understanding. I'm not going to fight you, Daniel, I said. His expression shifted slightly. Confusion? Suspicion. Then what are you going to do? I took a slow breath. I'm going to set boundaries. The word landed harder than anything else I had said. Because boundaries meant limits, meant consequences, meant change. What does that mean? He asked. It means I said that you don't get to make decisions for me. I never... You tried, I said gently. And it stops now. He stared at me, trying to process, trying to find the argument. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. You can disagree with me, I continued. You can question me. You can even worry about me. But you cannot control me. The room was completely silent. And if you try again, I added softly, there will be distance. That was the part he didn't expect. Not anger, not rejection, but consequence. You'd push me away, he asked. There was something in his voice now, something younger, less certain. I wouldn't push you away, I said. I would step back, and there's a difference. He looked at me for a long time, and for the first time since he walked in, he didn't look certain. I need time, he said finally. I nodded. Take it. He moved toward the door, then paused. Mom. I waited. I don't want to lose you. That was the truth. Finally, unfiltered. You won't, I said. But things are going to change. He nodded slowly, and then he left. And when the door closed behind him, I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet, to the absence, to the shift. This wasn't resolution, not yet, but it was something just as important, clarity. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. The next few weeks didn't bring dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches, no legal threats, no sudden reversals. Instead, they brought something quieter, something slower, something far more difficult. Change. Daniel kept his distance. Not completely gone, but careful. Measured, like someone learning how to walk across unfamiliar ground without triggering something dangerous. At first, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Was it avoidance, resentment, or respect? Then one afternoon, I got a message. Not a call, not a long explanation. Just a message. Can we meet somewhere neutral? I read it twice. Then once neutral. I read it twice. Then once or. Because those 3 words, somewhere neutral, meant something. It meant he wasn't coming to take control. He was coming to listen. Or at least, trying to. We met at a small cafe,
because those 3 words, somewhere neutral, meant something. It meant he wasn't coming to take control. He was coming to listen. Or, at least, trying to. We met at a small cafe across town. Not the kind of place we used to go. No history. No memories. No emotional weight. Just a table, 2 chairs, and space. He was already there when I arrived. No laptop. No phone in his hand. Just sitting. Waiting. That more than anything told me something had shifted. "Hi," he said as I approached. "Hi." I sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Not awkward, not tense. Just quiet. "I've been thinking," he said finally. I nodded. "I figured." He let out a small breath. "I don't like how I handled things." That was it. No justification, no deflection, just truth. I didn't rush to respond, because moments like that deserve space. "I thought I was protecting you," he continued. "I know I said, but I wasn't listening to you." There it was, the missing piece. Not belief, not agreement, listening. "And I didn't realize how much I needed to be right," he added. I studied him for a moment. That wasn't easy to say. Not for someone like Daniel. "Why now?" I asked gently. "What changed?" He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "You didn't fight me." I blinked slightly. "That's what changed?" I asked. He nodded. "I expected you to argue, to defend yourself, to try to convince me, and when I didn't," I asked. He gave a small, almost self-conscious smile. I had nothing to push against. That made sense, more than he probably realized. And without that, he continued, I had to sit with my own thoughts. I leaned back slightly, and he exhaled. And I didn't like what I found. Silence settled between us again. But this time, it felt different. Lighter. I've spent most of my lighter. I've spent most of my life, Faye, believing that being certain meant being right, he said. And it doesn't, I asked softly. He shook his head. No. I felt something in my C-Hest shift. Not relief. Not exactly. But Faye believing that being certain meant being right, he said. And it doesn't, I asked softly. He shook his head. No. I felt something in my chest shift. Not relief. Not exactly, but recognition. That's a hard lesson, I said. Yeah, he replied. It is. He looked at me again, more open now, less guarded. I don't fully trust Jonathan, he admitted. I nodded. That's okay. He seemed surprised. You're not going to argue with that. No, I said. Trust takes time, and it's yours to decide. He absorbed that, slowly. But I do trust you, he said, and I didn't act like it. That was the apology. Not polished, not perfect, but real. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. We sat there for a while longer, talking, not about legal strategy, not about control, but about things we hadn't talked about in years. His work, my routines, memories of his father. The way life had quietly moved forward without either of us noticing the distance growing between us. At one point, he asked something that caught me off guard. Why didn't you tell us about the judge before? I smiled faintly. Because it wasn't about recognition, I said. It was about doing the right thing. He nodded slowly. I think I understand that now. When we left the cafe, nothing felt magically fixed. No dramatic resolution, no perfect ending, but something was different. We were walking side by side again, not perfectly aligned, but no longer pulling in opposite directions. Rebecca came over more often after that, not to repair everything at once, but to rebuild slowly. One conversation at a time. Even Jonathan noticed the change. "You look lighter," he said one afternoon. "Do I?" I asked. He nodded.
You stopped carrying something that wasn't yours.
I thought about that and realized he was right. For years I had carried their assumptions, their doubts, their fears, as if they were mine to solve, mine to fix, mine to prove wrong. But they weren't. Letting go of that changed everything. A month later, we finalized the estate structure. Not as a battlefield, but as a collaboration. Clear roles, clear boundaries, clear expectations. Daniel was involved, but not in control. Rebecca was included, but not influenced. And me. For the first time in a long time, I was simply myself. Not someone to be managed. Not someone to be corrected. Not someone to be protected. Just me. The woman who had once stood in a courtroom and quietly told the truth. The woman who had built a life without needing recognition. The woman who had almost been reduced to a misunderstanding, but chose not to be. And that judge, he never needed to say anything more after that day, because his words had already done what they needed to do. Not just in that courtroom, but in my family. They didn't restore my authority. They revealed it, and sometimes that's all it takes. Not louder words, not stronger arguments, just truth. Spoken at the right moment, and the courage to stand in it, because in the end, it wasn't the judge who changed everything. It was the moment I stopped trying to be understood and started standing firm in who I already was. And that is where real peace begins. There are moments in life when the deepest pain doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who believe they know us best. From family, from those who think they are protecting us while quietly taking away our voice. This story isn't just about conflict. It's about something far more important: identity. Michael didn't lose herself overnight. She was slowly redefined by assumptions, by control disguised as care, by certainty that left no room for her truth. And that happens more often than we admit, especially to women who have spent a lifetime giving, supporting, and holding everything together. The lesson here isn't about proving others wrong. It's about something stronger. It's about knowing who you are, even when no one else sees it. It's about understanding that you don't need to fight every misunderstanding. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand still and let the truth reveal itself. Boundaries are not rejection. They are clarity. And clarity creates space for respect, for growth, and sometimes for reconciliation. Not everyone will understand you immediately. Some people will need time. Some may never fully understand. But that doesn't make your truth any less valid. And it doesn't mean you should shrink to fit their expectations. If there's one thing to take away, it's this: you don't need permission to be who you are.
And the people who truly belong in your life will eventually learn to meet you there. If this story resonated with you, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been misunderstood by your own family? What did you do? Share your experience in the comments. Your voice might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe in stories about strength, truth, and quiet resilience, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I always read your messages. You're not alone in this.
There comes a point in life, often later than we expect, when we realize that being misunderstood can hurt more deeply than being hurt by strangers. It's especially painful when it comes from family, from the very people who helped shape us, who believe they know our story better than we do. But one of the most powerful lessons this journey teaches is that your identity does not belong to anyone else's perception. You are not defined by how others interpret your choices, your strength, or your silence. Sometimes people project their fears onto you. They call it concern, protection, even love, but underneath it can quietly become control. And if you're not careful, you might start questioning yourself, shrinking, doubting your own voice. But here's the truth. You don't need to fight every misunderstanding to prove your worth. Real strength is quieter than that. It's the ability to stand firm in who you are, even when no one is clapping, even when no one immediately understands. It's choosing dignity over argument, clarity over chaos, and self-respect over approval. Boundaries are not walls meant to push people away. They are bridges to healthier relationships, bonds built on respect, not control. And when you set them, you teach others how to treat you, or you reveal who is unwilling to. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever felt misunderstood by your own family? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe in stories about strength, truth, and quiet courage, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means more than you know, and I'm so grateful you're here.